I have always loved old houses. Their walls feel alive, as if every corner has a story to tell. When I rented that little old house, I had no idea that a scary story was waiting for me this time. At first, everything was normal. The house, although old and a little worn, had a strange sense of peace. A few weeks passed and I had gotten used to my new life. At night, I would sit on the couch and read a book, in silence, with only the sound of the wind blowing through the old windows. But then, strange things started happening. The first time, I noticed that some of my breakfast bread had disappeared. I said maybe I had made a mistake, maybe I had bought less than I thought. But this happened many times. The milk container had been opened, and the kitchen cupboard door was slightly ajar. I said maybe I had been distracted. One night, right after I turned off the lights, I heard a faint rustling sound from the kitchen. I put it down to a mouse or some other animal and went to sleep. But I had a strange feeling as if something wasn't right. The next night, while washing the dishes, I felt someone watching me from behind. I quickly turned around, but there was nothing. I thought I was hallucinating, but the feeling of fear weighed on my shoulders like a weight. Everything became more real when one night I heard footsteps. This time I was sure. The sound was very clear. Feet walking slowly through the house. My heart was pounding. I got out of bed, grabbed a knife from the kitchen, and walked towards the sound. I looked everywhere, but there was no one. I was trying to convince myself that I had heard wrong when suddenly my eyes fell on the understairs cupboard. The door was slightly open. My heart was beating out of my chest. I slowly opened the door. A strange smell came out. It was dark inside the closet. But when I turned on the flashlight on my phone, I saw something that made my whole body freeze. Inside the closet was a small mattress, along with some clothes that didn't belong to me. A bottle of water, a few packets of biscuits, and even a notebook. Someone was living here, and right in my house. My whole body was shaking. I couldn't believe it. How was this possible? I decided to leave the house immediately and call the police. But before I could take a step, I heard a loud noise behind me. I turned around and saw him. A thin, disheveled man staring at me with his sunken eyes. My breath caught in my chest. I couldn't even scream. He didn't say anything. He just walked slowly toward the door and disappeared. The police later learned that he had been living in my house for a long time. Every night when I was sleeping, he would come out of his hiding place, eat my food, and hide again. The fact that I had never noticed him was what terrified me more than anything else. Now, whenever I go to a house, the first thing I check is the closets. Because now I know for sure that someone could always be hiding there. I always drew the curtains in my room before going to bed at night. It gave me a special sense of peace. I could close the window and be cut off from the darkness outside. My house was on the 4th floor of an old apartment building. The only thing visible from the window was the night sky and the dim lights of the buildings opposite. But one night everything changed. That night, as usual, I was drawing the curtains when for a moment I saw something reflected in the window. A face staring back at me. My breath caught in my chest. I immediately turned and stared outside. But there was no one. The street below was dark and deserted. The only sound was the wind blowing between the buildings. My heart was beating faster. I thought maybe I was hallucinating. I told myself that the street lights were causing this hallucination. I drew the curtain and tried not to think about it. But that was only the beginning. The next night, the same thing happened. When I drew the curtain again, I saw the face reflected in the window. But this time I looked more carefully. The face was clearer. It looked like a man, with pale skin and deep-set eyes. But there was something unusual about it. It looked very flat, as if it did not belong to a living being. This time I dared to look out immediately. But still, No one was there. I turned my head to the window. The reflection of the face had disappeared. My heart began to pound. I told myself I was tired. My mind was playing tricks on me. But there was a strange feeling in the house. It was as if something invisible was lurking in the darkness. I decided to ignore it, but an unpleasant feeling remained. Even when I turned off the light and went to bed, I felt that someone was watching me. A few nights later, I could no longer convince myself that it was just an illusion. That night, when I drew the curtain, the face in the reflection of the window appeared more clearly than ever. But this time, something had changed. His face was smiling, an unnatural smile, drawn and frightening. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't dare turn around and look outside. But suddenly the power in my room went out for a few seconds. Everything was plunged into total darkness. My heart was pounding. The moment the light came back on, I quickly looked out the window. The face had disappeared, but I felt something standing behind me. I quickly turned around. No one was there, but the air was heavy. It was as if an invisible shadow was floating in the room. I couldn't ignore it. There was something in this house. Something was watching me. A few days later, I took a picture of the window to make sure. I wanted to see if I could capture something in its reflection. When I examined the picture, my blood froze in my veins. There was something in the picture, a dark, vague face, the same face I had seen, but this time closer than ever, as if someone was looking through the glass. I couldn't stay in this house anymore. That night, I left the house and went to a friend's house. But what scared me most was when I returned to see that the curtains in my room had been drawn back. I wasn't there, so who had drawn the curtains? It all started one winter night. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to a faint cry. At first, I thought maybe I was hallucinating or not sleeping well, but the sound was real. It was a baby crying in the hallway. I live alone and there are no children in my neighborhood. I told myself it must be from outside. I opened the window, but it was quiet outside. There was heavy snow everywhere, not even the sound of a car. I listened again. The sound became clearer as if someone was inside the house. I was scared, but curiosity made me get out of bed. I didn't turn on the lights. I don't know why. Maybe I didn't want to see something I didn't recognize in the light. I used my phone to light the way and went to the hallway. The closer I got, the clearer the sound became. A faint, continuous cry, like a newborn baby. I reached the living room. Everything was in place, but the sound was still there. I went to the kitchen, but there was nothing. When I returned, I felt something like a shadow pass by my eyes. My heart was beating fast, but there was nothing. Now the sound was coming from the barn. My barn is small, just a small wooden door that is always locked. I went forward and the lock was intact, but the sound was coming from inside. I thought maybe an animal was stuck inside, but it was impossible. I dared to open the door anyway. The barn was empty, just a few old cartons and boxes. But the crying stopped. It was as if someone had covered the child's mouth. I was stunned. I shone the phone's light into the barn, but I couldn't see anything. When I was about to close the door, my eyes fell on something. On the wall, small fingers had left traces of frost and dirt, as if someone had recently been there. I didn't sleep again that night. The crying stopped, but every time I approached the barn, I felt like someone was watching me from behind the door. I still don't know what I heard that night, but every time I turned off the lights in the house, I felt like a pair of little eyes were watching me in the darkness. A while ago, I decided to install security cameras in my house. To be honest, my main reason was to feel safe. I hadn't seen anything suspicious, But you can't be too careful these days. My house is old, a 3-bedroom townhouse with a small yard. It seemed like nothing special had ever happened here. But I was wrong. I installed the cameras and set them up with the app on my phone. The first night went by without a hitch. I reviewed the footage. Everything was normal the second day, and the same thing happened the third night. But as I was reviewing the footage, I noticed something strange. It was around 2 a.m. when one of the living room cameras detected movement. At first, I thought it might be a system error. But when I opened the video, I saw a clear image, a shadow slowly passing in front of the camera. My breath caught in my chest. Maybe someone had entered the house. But nothing had moved. I hadn't heard a sound. I told myself it might be a reflection of light or something. But I felt no peace. I decided to stay up the next night. At 2 in the morning, I was sitting on the living room sofa, looking at the camera monitor. The lights were off. Only the light from the monitor screen illuminated the space. A heavy silence reigned in the house. Time passed slowly, but I didn't see anything until 3 o'clock when I was already tired. I was about to get up when I heard a faint sound from the kitchen. I froze. It seemed like a door was slowly opening. I quickly looked at the monitor. The kitchen camera showed a vague shadow. Something or someone was there. I slowly got up and walked towards the kitchen with my phone turned on like a flashlight. I could hear my breathing in the hallway. When I reached the kitchen door, there was nothing. Everything was in its place. I looked at the camera, but now the image was blank. Everything seemed normal, but I had a strong feeling that I was not alone. That night I watched the recorded videos again. When I reached the kitchen scene, my heart stopped. A bright shadow passed by the refrigerator, paused, and then looked directly into the camera. There was no face, just a dark shadow with 2 empty eyes that seemed to be looking at me from the monitor. A muffled laugh came from the monitor speakers. I couldn't go on any longer. The next day I packed up all my things and left the house. I never went back there. The cameras still work, but every time I want to watch the new videos, I feel like the shadow is still waiting for me to look at it again. Maybe the camera won't be needed anymore, because I feel like it's there wherever I go. In the winter of 2016, Clara and Michael, a young couple from New York, decided to spend the Christmas holidays away from the hustle and bustle of the city. Clara, a writer who needed some peace and quiet while working on a new project, and Michael, a professional photographer, were looking for an opportunity to photograph snowy landscapes. They rented an old house on the edge of the Vermont woods. The two-story Victorian was located in a secluded and remote area. The owner, an elderly woman they had only communicated with via email, had offered the house for a very low price. Michael jumped at the chance, but Clara was a little hesitant. She couldn't help but feel a strange sense of dread from the pictures in the ad. There was something about the house, especially its tall, dark windows. But since Michael was eager, she agreed. They arrived just before dusk. The cold immediately bit their skin when they got out of the car. The house was nestled among a thicket of pine trees, and an eerie silence reigned around them. No birds were singing, no wind in the trees. Michael took the key from under the flower pot by the door and opened the door. The house was full of old things. Velvet sofas, oil paintings of unknown faces, and a pendulum clock that ticked in the silence of the house. They could smell the dampness and old wood. Clara looked around and whispered, "This looks so strange." Michael replied with a laugh, "That's great. I can imagine how amazing the pictures I'll take from here will be." After the simple dinner they had brought, Michael decided to take a few pictures of the interior of the house. Clara, tired from the long drive, sat down on the sofa and opened the book she had brought with her. But something was distracting her. She felt someone staring at her from behind. "Michael, don't you feel like it's too lonely here?" Michael said belatedly. "Well, that's why we chose this place, isn't it?" and adjusted his camera. When they went to bed, it was strangely cold, even with the heater on. In the middle of the night, Clara was awakened by the sound of footsteps coming from downstairs. She thought Michael might have gone to the kitchen, but when she returned, she saw that Michael was still sleeping next to her. She woke him up gently with her heartbeat. "Michael, someone is here. You're hallucinating. Maybe it's the sound of the house. It's an old house." But Clara was sure that the sound was real. The next day, Michael decided to check the basement, because it was possible that an animal like a raccoon had entered the house. Clara insisted that she go with him. The basement was dark and damp. With the light of a flashlight, they saw that the floor of the basement was covered with a layer of dirt. In the corner of the basement was a small wooden door. Michael opened the door and entered a small room with walls blackened with charcoal. On one of the walls were carved strange symbols. Clara, now terrified, said, "It looks like some kind of religious or witchcraft symbol." Michael tried to calm her down, but even he felt uneasy. The second night, Michael went to bed later than usual because he wanted to edit his photos. Clara fell asleep earlier, but something woke her up. In the darkness of the room, he saw a shadow quickly pass by the bed. She called out to him in a shaky voice, "Michael." Michael was completely confused. "What happened?" he said. "Someone was here. I saw him." Michael got up and turned on the light, but there was no sign of anyone. Michael decided to research the history of the house. He called the local library and found out that the house had been built in the 1920s and that the original owner was a man named George Harper. George had been a hot topic for suspicious activity and rumors of missing persons, but no evidence was found against him. Michael shared this information with Clara. Now they both decided they had to leave the house. That night, as they were packing, the power went out. In the darkness, they could hear whispers coming from downstairs. Michael grabbed a flashlight and told Clara to wait in the car. He went toward the sound but saw nothing. When he returned, Clara said in horror, "Michael, why are you here?" I didn't say anything," Michael said in surprise. Without a moment's hesitation, they got in the car and drove away. Later, they learned that several other people had had similar experiences in the house, but there was no logical explanation for what was happening.
This incident happened when I was about 5 or 6 years old. My little sister was born exactly 1 year before this incident, and my mom and dad had just divorced, so my mom and stepdad took us to a new house in West Virginia. It was on the mountainside, it was made of dark wood, it was just like the houses in horror movies. It had 3 floors, the main door opened to the 2nd floor, and our rooms were there. Go inside. Downstairs, there was a kitchen, a laundry room, and a mysterious room. This mysterious room was the only room in our house with a metal door. Cold air came out of it, and there was a lock that only my mom and the owner had the key to. The owner of the house said that there was a heater in the house. My room was right above the heater of the house, and it was also in the ceiling of my room in the attic. For a minute, when I would go out of my room and come back, I would see my things being moved, swarms of bees and other insects coming out of the attic, and it was strange that they were only coming from my room. I was a child then, I didn't understand what was going on, but my mother and my stepfather used to hear the sound of walking every night. When they heard this sound, only one of them was awake. At that time, I thought that my sister was moving my things and the sound of walking was due to the old floor of the house. One night I woke up and felt someone was in my room. I turned my head and saw a boy standing in my room. It was very dark. I could only see his wear, and I could only see that he was my height and size. So I said, "Hello?" The boy is my answer. He said that he came home from cooking and then he asked if I could play with my toys. I told him no because it was late and my mom and dad wouldn't let me. When I said this, I could see the boy's face in the dark, as if he was very angry with my answer, and then he disappeared in a second. The next day, I told my mom and stepfather about him. It was clear from their expressions that they were worried, but they laughed at me and said, "You must have dreamed." Even though I was a child, I could tell from the look on their faces that they were hiding something from me, but I ignored it. Another thing happened that night. I woke up again with the feeling that I was not alone in my room. The difference is that this time I opened my eyes and encountered something evil. An old woman was sitting on my bed. Her face was only a few centimeters away from mine. I could feel his breath slowly on my face. His eyes were empty and black. I quickly got out of bed and ran, opened my room door and went to my sister's room. And then I remembered her friend's house and only my little sister was in her crib. When I turned my head, I saw the old woman standing at the end of the road and he was slowly coming towards me when he was passing by the window. There was lightning at the same time, and the old woman disappeared in a moment. Then a wolf appeared in her place who was coming towards me. I quickly returned to my room and when I looked down there was thunder again. And lightning came and then I saw some spiders on the pillow. I looked back to see if the spirit was there or not, and with the next lightning, the little boy appeared in front of me. He got closer and closer until I passed out, again in my bed. I woke up covered in sweat. I remember that time I was full of questions. I told the story to my mom and stepfather again, and after some time we went to that house. My mom shared everything that happened with the owner of the house, and he said that when he built this house, a widowed mother lived there with 3 children. Her husband was killed in the Civil War, and sometime later, the woman killed all 3 children with a knife and hid their bodies in the fireplace of the house. Those murders explained everything. Why was the sound of walking coming from inside? Why were my toys moving? And why had I seen the ghost of a boy and an evil old woman? Even now, sometimes I ask myself what made a woman kill her children. Sadness, loneliness, madness, God knows. But there is another question in my mind. If she could kill her children so easily, there was nothing for him to destroy us. That is, what would happen to us if we stayed in that house?